Hey everyone, so I'm back again because I need to talk about the films I saw at the Cannes Film Festival from 2023. Other YouTubers have already started making their own videos about their Cannes experiences and I don't want to fall behind all too much. But it was my first time attending, so let's talk a bit about that first. What I loved so much about this festival is that it was like an almost religious experience, like a days-long ritual. For all these days, I did not look at a single YouTube video, I barely even read any reviews. I had to be alert all the time, refresh the Cannes ticketing website all the time, just to get a ticket for a sold out screening for any day, and stay in last minute lines for world premieres, and stay hydrated, eat at McDonald's or whatever, get dressed in a suit really quickly. It was insane, but I was living all of it. It was just like a weird kind of sacrifice. It was amazing. The theater experiences I've had at this festival were some like I'd never even had before in my life. Everything about being at Cannes is just so hypnotic. You're so flooded by film and young people interested in film, and everything there just supports your passion in that sense. Film becomes all that there is, and that is just so bizarrely freeing. At my two favorite films of the festival, it was like I got completely lost into the screen and I became the film for a moment. So anyway, let's stop being corny and just talk about these movies in order from which I saw them in, excluding About Dry Grasses because I already made a video on it. The first film I saw at the festival was a French movie, the world premiere for the Pot-au-Feu. This movie was fine, it was decent, so I don't really have a whole lot to say about it, but let's just say a few things about it. There's a lot of atmosphere to how this film portrays shadows and just how the environments are lit in this extremely gorgeous summery way. It is a very lush and gorgeous looking film. The camera constantly moves and it is quite the exhilarating filmmaking ride, at least for the first half of the film. After that it becomes quite generic and I was just waiting for it to end. But I can't talk about this film without mentioning its most notable aspect, which is the food porn. There is so much cooking in this movie. Much of the first half is just cooking, and the movie is at its best when it just showcases food. Afterwards, it reveals itself to be more of a slow, middle-aged romance film between Juliette Binoche and Benoit Magimel, if I'm saying that right. It's good for grandmas, it's beautifully shot, but it's also full of cliches. But at the same time, I cannot deny the passion and beauty in the filmmaking here. Even the editing has purpose to it in the way it plays around the performances. A sweet film with some poetic moments, but even those poetic moments were a bit like pretentious French moments. I cannot explain them. Let's just say these moments of poetry aren't things you feel for yourself. They are things that are merely depicted by the film and nothing more. It's decent, watch it if you want. Watch it if you want to spend 2.5 hours on a very uneventful film. And I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. Next I saw The Settlers. This is a debut feature film by Chilean director Felipe Galvez Haberle, and it played in the Un Certain Regard section. This is honestly a pretty outstanding debut feature. It tells a familiar story in a western setting, being about a small expedition in South America to take over the lands of the Native Americans and commit genocide. Obviously, this small expedition represents a larger historical genocide, and it tells its story through pretty familiar archetypes. Right away, this film feels rough around the edges in terms of pacing, performances, and writing, but it does get better and more professional as it goes along, with much of it getting recontextualized in a pretty powerful way by the time the third act hits. It winds up making some pretty powerful historical statements, and I honestly kind of wanted to cry after the film ended. And if it weren't for seeing About Dry Grasses right after it, I would have probably cried for longer. The cinematography and music also really stand out here in their stark compositions, although I would say the music is sometimes used in confusing ways. And in that sense, there's more scenes in this film that are a bit confusing in their attempts. Some moments in this feel like they're a bit too edgy, a bit too extreme for reasons that don't feel fully justified, but the film does come around. I really like this movie all around, and I'm excited for more people to see it, and I'm also excited for this director to make more films going forward. For now, I am giving this one a 7 out of 10. So let's talk about May December, the new film by Todd Haynes. This was one of the most anticipated films of the festival, and Todd Haynes is a generally good director, although none of his films are fully satisfying for me, with my favorite of his probably just being Safe. Almost everyone I talked to at the festival thought this was a real highlight highlight, but unfortunately I gotta say I did not really retain all that much out of this experience. In essence, this movie is kind of a weird American satire, commenting on the sensationalism in the media when it comes to real life stories. In general, the whole movie is about sensationalism, victimization, and other topics of the like, and it's a very thematically interesting film that I don't really want to spoil in that sense. But by the end, I just found the experience of this movie to be weirdly shallow. And that's not because this movie isn't purposeful or in some sense even well done, but this whole thing just felt kind of vapid and empty to me. And a part of me feels like this must have been the point. When I go out of my way to criticize this movie, I find that a lot of my criticisms actually kind of support this movie in a very metatextual way. This movie feels fake. I feel little emotional investment because everyone just feels like an actor to me. The symbolism is unspecial and on the nose. The filmmaking is not nearly expressive enough to keep my attention, so after the first hour I kind of lost all my investment already. And yet all of this just could have been the point. This movie is an anti-biopic. It is an anti-sensationalist true crime film. Everything in this movie is boring because the truth is boring. It's not like TV. And this movie needs to show that, and that's completely valid. However, with this movie riding on being a bit of an ironic comedy as well, I did not find much of it very funny or interesting besides a few scenes. And honestly, I'm still just left kind of confused by it, even thematically. This movie is going for something that I might not quite understand because I just fundamentally don't really connect with it. It feels a little too American maybe for me, and maybe I just don't really get that. I'm not American, obviously. So I'm gonna be honest here. I'm gonna give this one a strong 5 out of 10. It's closer to a 6. Check this movie out whenever it's on Netflix, because Netflix bought the rights to this film and lots of people absolutely love it. So, you know, don't really listen to me. Another film I saw was Club Zero, but I actually only watched an hour of this film before walking out so I could stand in line for another film. I had no interest in seeing this film because it had bad reviews, and lo and behold, the movie is atrocious. This movie is not necessarily awful in concept, but it is genuinely, viscerally unenjoyable. And not in the sense where it's uncomfortable but funny like a Yorgos Lanthimos film. No, this movie has one concept, one joke, one gag, and it repeats it constantly. And man, is it so tedious, but absolutely proud of its own tediousness. And that's not to say it's poorly shot or poorly acted. In many ways, this is a competent film, but what it's competent at, it's completely fucking pretentious. I'm giving this one a 3 out of 10 from what I've seen, and it probably should be lower, but whatever, who cares. The film I saw after walking out of Club Zero was In Our Day by Hong Sang-soo, and I actually really enjoyed this movie. Hong Sang-soo is a very interesting South Korean director who essentially only makes movies about people drinking, hanging out, and eating. They're basically mumblecore films made all by himself with no money, and if you think that sounds boring, you're kind of correct. But I've grown to like his style after seeing many of his films, and this might be my favorite film of his. There's not much about this film that's essentially all that different from his other films, but it feels like it really has something to say. There's like little profound moments of dialogue in this movie that make this film worth it and stick with me. I also really love how this movie managed to tell two stories and kind of poetically intertwines them. I find that stuff really cool, and this movie does it super well. I also think there's some scenes in this film with great framing and this fantastic sense of claustrophobia which results in a release later on. As much as I really like this movie, there's an issue with it I unfortunately have with most Hong Sang-soo films, and that is the fact that it's just way too slow. While I do love a lot of the dialogue, much of it is always improvised, and the actors always seem to struggle to improvise within the first minute, which always results in some really awkward, unrealistic lines. This is an issue with all Hong Sang-soo films, but unfortunately it just gets kind of really bad in the middle section of this film, but afterwards it's just really good again. But still, it's a bothersome thing and I don't really enjoy that. Regardless, I really love this movie and I would watch it again. It's funny, sweet, personal, and meaningful, even though it isn't like the most memorable film in existence. And I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. Then I saw the The Old Oak by Ken Loach. This was another world premiere, and this is apparently Ken Loach's last film, so I was very excited to see it. It got mixed reviews, but I still really liked it. I really like Loach's recent films like I, Daniel Blake and Sorry We Missed You. While they can be a bit melodramatic and manipulative at points, I really remember their characters and genuinely care for them. These are movies that aren't necessarily perfect, but they feel like genuinely realistic and powerful social dramas. The Old Oak feels largely the same as these, but the plot becomes more contrived at points, and the emotional manipulation goes too far, to the point of it not really feeling as realistic anymore. The usage of music in this film is not very well earned, and it makes this film sometimes feel like kind of a parody of those Ken Loach films that I love. Regardless, this film shines with its great, lovable, and well-written characters, and genuinely beautiful cinematography. This film's story tries to tackle the Syrian refugee crisis that started around 2016, and it tackles it in a very mature, genuine, and thought-provoking way. Mind you, it doesn't do anything revolutionary with this concept, but it feels honest and empathetic. And I feel it's worth mentioning that all the scenes directly tackling the lives of these refugees, as opposed to the English characters in the film, never felt sappy or manipulative. Out of all the films I saw at Cannes, this was the most consistently engaging and enjoyable, making it all just breeze by the end. It really made me tear up and maybe even cry at points, and it felt like a very genuine final statement, even with all of its flaws. This film aims to be hopeful instead of nihilistic or depressing, but with that comes its sappiness, which honestly kind of feels a bit cathartic at this point as well. Some could call this film politically naive, which could be true, but I would say it's hopeful in a very humanistic sense. I enjoyed this movie very much, and I would give it a 7 out of 10, while I would give the other two Ken Loach films I mentioned around an 8 out of 10, or 9 maybe. I would need to see this film a second time to know if I think it's actually great or not, but you know, it has some merit and it was very much worth watching and enjoyable. And just like that, we arrived at the final day of the festival where I saw two great films. The first of these was Perfect Days by legendary director Wim Wenders, who you may know from Wings of Desire and Paris, Texas. This is something of a comeback for him, considering his narrative features haven't exactly been very well received over the past 2 decades, I think, although his documentaries have stayed critically acclaimed. This film was a bit of a poetic character study, filmed in a 4:3 aspect ratio, which brings up a variety of emotions. The directing and cinematography make this film really special. With not so many words being spoken, we get to feel the main character's peacefulness, transitioning to stress and claustrophobia, to then melancholy, and then all the way back to that peacefulness again. The cinematography and directing are just exceptional here. They really create this whole mind state for the viewer, and it becomes such an exhilarating, varied, and immersive experience. The film feels both original and familiar, but also resonates on a deeper level that made parts of it feel kind of profound as I was watching it. If I could compare this movie to anything, it's like Patterson by Jim Jarmusch meets Jeanne Dielman, but in a very emotionally sincere, Wim Wenders-y way. This film felt somewhat quaint as a slice of life day-by-day story, but also managed to capture a deeper truth that does stick with me. There's a few parts of this film that felt a bit too tropey in a somewhat unnecessary crowd-pleasing way, but all around, this was an incredibly gentle, empathetic, and relatable film. As of right now, I can't quite tell if this movie will reveal itself more on a second watch, or just largely stay the same. So for now, I'm giving this one a really strong 8 out of 10, and it could be a 9 later on, because it was really beautiful and I loved it. And the final film I saw at Cannes was The Zone of Interest. This film was directed by Jonathan Glazer, who most of you may know from Under the Skin from 2013, and this is his first film since. This was likely the most anticipated film of the festival, and wound up getting the best reviews out of everything in competition, with a 98 on Metacritic, and it also won the Grand Prix since then, which obviously is the second prize behind the Palme d'Or. I spent a full week trying to get tickets for this film, but it was just impossible. This movie got so hyped up that tickets got sold out within a literal second. I tried and tried again and again to get into any screening I could, but it was just not possible. But as luck would have it, on the final day I managed to get a ticket for the last screening of the festival. I waited 4 hours early in the last minute ticket line until someone came up to me pretty quickly and gave me their ticket. So now, having seen the film, I can say it is truly beautiful incredible, harrowing, and traumatizing. The premise of this film is actually very straightforward. It's a Holocaust film, but told entirely from the perspective of the Nazis. We follow the camp commander of Auschwitz and his family, and as if it's a reality show, we see their lives unfold. Much of this film is shot with hidden cameras, which makes for a very large variety of shots, though all of these shots are very distant and don't necessarily have any meaningful composition to them. There certainly are moments of precise mise-en-scène, but much of this film feels intentionally distant and arbitrary in its shots. It's hard for me to really convincingly speak about this film though, as much of it entirely speaks for itself. I can tell you this film is about the banality of evil, about making you see the true horror of the Holocaust by depicting the detached people in charge of it. I can say how we never see any Jews on screen, how we can sometimes faintly hear their screams in the background, but saying this makes the film sound weirdly on the nose or exploitative. The truth is that it's one thing to describe this film, but it's another thing to actually experience this. This film shows the Nazis and the society they created as clearly human, but in a very familiar sense. They have families, they have jobs, they go outside, they argue, they live their normal lives, but we know they are anything but normal. We as an audience aren't afforded the luxury of experiencing this film as anything normal. It's first of all artificial, but most importantly, what we are being shown is the most inhumane thing in existence. The normalization of mass murder and genocide through the guise that if you aren't the one being targeted in the Holocaust, then it doesn't concern you. It's complete apathy. As I said though, you need to experience this film for yourself, because I can't quite do it justice. This is a very profound and very experimental film that is precise and purposeful in its experimentation. It knows exactly what it wants to say and when to say it. It knows its limitations. It knows its potential shortcomings. It's aware of its own monotony and tedium within its distant and plotless design. It uses all of its self-awareness to push through and make a profound cinematic statement on evil and apathy. Any moment that you as an audience member may perceive as boring only reinforces how normalized evil not only was, but still is. Any moment of boredom only makes us join in on the apathy and thus the evil. Daring to become numb to any of it is already a sign of normalized evil. Any moment of recognition and relatability makes us join in on the evil because everything we are being shown is distinctly human, but it's a distorted humanity, molded to fit into a design that allows itself to be called just for committing mass genocide. This is really one of the most philosophical and transcendent films I've seen in years. It is virtually flawless, but also incredibly sensitive to talk about. I gave this film a 9 out of 10 at first, but after writing about it and recording this, I kind of feel this one deserves a 10 out of 10. As I said, it's hard to explain why exactly this movie is a masterpiece. This concept sounds like it should be exploitative. The mere concept of a film being able to make you experience what it must have been like to be a Nazi sounds kind of cruel and heartless. But as I said, the movie is genuinely smart and aware of this idea, so it really plays with it and makes something truly special out of it. This movie is empathetic. It does not have apathy in it. It has so much to say and so much heart with how it says it, but it's also heartless because the truth is heartless. And this is a film that really transports you back to the past and makes you feel all of it in the most gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, borderline traumatic way. This is my second favorite film of the year, behind About Dry Grasses, and I am giving this one a 10 out of 10. And that does it for all the films I saw at Cannes. I missed out on the new Scorsese film because it didn't play in the final 4 days where I was actually present at the festival. I also missed out on the Palme d'Or winner, Anatomy of a Fall, so I guess I'll watch it at some point. But yeah, movies are great, and I'm so grateful if you actually watch this video. So, please like, comment, subscribe, and tell me how much you liked it or hated it. I don't know. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye bye.